Thank you so much. It's a delight to be back with you again tonight. In John chapter 4, verse 35, Jesus said to his disciples, and through them says to us, "Do you not say there are yet 4 months, and then comes the harvest? I say to you, lift up your eyes. See that the fields are already white for harvest." So in session 2 tonight, we want to allow the Lord to help us to lift up our eyes, to see the opportunities that God has already placed around us. If you were not here last week in session 1, we talked about bridges to the gospel. You have that material in your handout, and if you missed that last week, it was recorded, right? You can go online and watch that and catch up. So tonight, session 2, lift up our eyes. It's the whole concept of concentric circles of concern. And that comes from this diagram from a book by the same name by Oscar Thompson called Concentric Circles of Concern. Oscar Thompson was a professor of evangelism at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth in the late 1970s. He developed a very aggressive form of cancer, and from the time that he got his diagnosis until he was called to glory was about 2 months. But he went out with the flag flying high. He spent those last 2 months there in the cancer ward of the hospital, and he led many of his fellow cancer patients to faith in Christ, several of the nurses and some of the doctors, because he was a person of hope in the midst of a sea of despair. After he died, his widow Carolyn, who my wife Sharon and I got to know when we lived in Fort Worth, took his class notes and published them in this book, Concentric Circles of Concern. Here was the key thrust in Oscar Thompson's class. He would begin class by asking this question: what is the most important word in the English language? Now, how would you answer that question? A lot of people would say love. A lot of people would say God. Because we're here in a Bible-believing church, we'd all say Jesus, right? We know Jesus has to be the right answer to that question. Those are all important, but Oscar Thompson would say no. The most important word in the English language is the word relationship. You can't have love without a relationship. And he noted that a lot of times when people think about evangelism, they think about person X, that stranger that they've not yet met, but God's going to bring into their life. And Oscar Thompson said, yes, we need to be ready to share the gospel with person X. But he noted God has already put us in relationship with a whole lot of people, some of whom don't know the Lord. And are we looking for opportunities to share the gospel with them? Are we praying regularly that God would open that door? So what I want us to do tonight is lift up our eyes and look at the people God has already placed around our lives. Now, I'm going to tell you in advance what the assignment's going to be so you can be prepared when we break at 7:15 and you're going to do some application. As we walk through these concentric circles, I want you've got a piece of paper there and a pen, just jot down names of family members, of friends, of coworkers, of classmates, of neighbors, of acquaintances who don't know the gospel. And at 7:15, when I wrap up, I'm going to ask you to turn to the person next to you and share 3 of those names. Well, we're going to have a 3 most wanted list tonight. 3 of those names, and we're going to pray that over the next 30 days, God will give us an opportunity to speak a word of hope to those 3 people. So let's jump in, looking first at the initial circle where you are, and then you come to your immediate family, and then to your relatives. Now, you may look at this family tree, and your family tree may look absolutely nothing like this. But who is there in your family that doesn't know the Lord? Immediate family members, extended family members. Who is it that you could reach out to within your immediate family? Some of you may say, well, I don't know my family tree. How would I discover that? Well, there are different ways you can do that. There are genealogical societies. You pay them a handsome fee, and they'll do all the work for you, give you the results in a nice bound book. Or you can pay a fee to get access to some of these genealogical sites, do the research yourself. But actually, there's an easier way. If you want to discover your family tree, simply run for public office, and then your opponent will do all the research for you. So if you don't know your family tree, that's an easy way to discover it. So just think for a minute. Think of your immediate family, parents, children, siblings, and then extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins. It would be a rare family indeed, where everyone, even in the extended family, knew the Lord. Anyone in your family who doesn't know Christ, just jot their name down. Just write their name down. Put it there on paper. You say, well, yes, Tim, I have some people like that, but how would I begin to share the gospel with them? Well, if you were here last week, we talked about bridge number 9, the relationship bridge. Relationship bridge, you can glance back there in your notes, basically is just where you identify that as a friend or family member, you've been a Christian for a long time, but you've never really shared the hope that you have in Christ. And you just ask them, can I do that? And I promise you the answer will be yes. So connect with families. I used to hate going to family reunions. Now, I didn't hate the food, okay? No better food than at a family reunion. But what I hated, particularly as a young boy, is that I had all these great aunts who wanted to hug my neck. And I'm not sure what kind of exotic perfume they had, but when you mixed it all together, it would take weeks to scrub off that smell. So I hated going to family reunions, but when I came to Christ, and particularly when I was called into ministry, I try and not miss a family reunion now, and here's why. Because people find out that I'm a pastor, that I'm a minister. Very quickly after I was called into ministry and started seminary, I became the designated prayer in our family. Okay, you all know what that is, right? Well, somehow they managed to have family reunions for decades before I came along, but now they have to wait until I show up to pray. Going to a family reunion some years ago, there was road construction, an accident, I'm running behind. My cell phone is just blowing up. Where are you? The food's getting cold. I'm stuck in traffic. Have somebody else pray. No, you're the only one that does it right. We'll get indigestion. We'll wait. Show up 20 minutes late, chug up the hill to the pavilion there, the picnic table where they're all waiting, out of breath, and pray. And I'm thinking, good grief. I mean, they managed to do this before I came along. And then I realized I'm an idiot. That is a God-given opportunity. And inevitably, it's been this way for years. At the family reunion, someone will come over to me and say, are you the preacher? And I go, I am. I know I don't look like it, but I'm ordained at all. Well, you think there might be some time this afternoon that we could talk? Yeah, no time like the present. Why don't we go over to this picnic table and let's talk? And I've had the opportunity now for years, happened just this past June, every family reunion, to be able to share the hope of Christ with a relative, many of whom I've never met before. So the first circle there, family, and then relatives. Who in your family, who among your relatives doesn't know Christ? And then next, the category of close friends. Don't just think about those whom you consider to be a close friend, but who might list you among their list of top 10 friends? See, something that unbelievers have figured out, they may not believe in Christianity, but they've figured out that Christians tend to be caring and compassionate people. Now, we're certainly not perfect, they know that, but when they have trouble, when they have struggles, they know that they're going to find a caring and listening ear with believers. So there are a lot of non-Christians, if they were to list their top 10 friends, there would be some of you on that list, even though you might not consider that person one of your top friends. Does that make sense? Okay, so as you think about close friends, don't just think about who are your close friends, but Who might be unbelievers that would say you are one of their close friends? I think about a man in Louisville named Gary. He's a carpenter. When Sharon and I bought our home in Louisville 29 years ago, our back patio had tree roots coming up underneath of it. It was like we were sitting in the Himalayas. I'd be leaning this way and she'd be leaning this way, and I'm like, we need just to tear up this patio and pour new concrete. Well, the price of concrete then was astronomical. It was going to actually not be much more to build a deck. So I told my wife, I'm going to build a deck. She goes, why don't we pay somebody to do it? I said, you don't think I can build a deck? She goes, oh, I know you can, but I want it to look nice, okay? To say that I'm a rough carpenter would be an accurate statement. I grew up on a pig farm. I built pig sheds. Pigs never once complained, but the boards didn't always look like they were made that way, right? My uncle was a master carpenter. He nailed two boards together. It looked like they grew that way. So I did put out some bids, and turns out Gary not only had the lowest bid, he could start right away. And so he said, but I'm going to have to work this in with other projects. And Gary was a Vietnam vet, a lot of scars in his life, and got to know him. We began to share over the couple months. And finally, the day came that Gary put his faith in Christ. Had the privilege of baptizing him. He became a trustee at the church that I was pastoring at the time. He would build our sets for our Christmas programs, and it's like there's nobody in the world that could do a better job. If you were to ask Gary, name your 10 closest friends, I would be on that list. Gary works way too much. He doesn't have a lot of social life. He's not one of my 10 closest friends. He's a friend, but I've been gifted with a lot of friends. So think about who are friends. And don't just think currently, think back for a ways. Think back to high school and college. Social media has a lot of challenges and a lot of problems, but one of the gifts that it gives us as believers is the ability to reconnect with people from our past we may have lost touch with. I've reconnected with most of my friends from high school, many of my friends from college. When I was in high school, I was a professing Christian. I was in church every Sunday. 6 years in a row, perfect attendance. We had a dairy. When my grandfather died, my dad said, we'll take over the dairy. How do you forget how much work running a dairy is? Like, Dad, how could you have forgotten this? You grew up doing this. Well, it didn't last long, but when you have a dairy, your vacation is you milk the cows in the morning, you drive an hour to the lake, you fish, and even if the fish are biting at 4 o'clock, you're pulling one in every cast, you got to shut it down because the cows need to be milked. They won't milk themselves. I'm in church every Sunday, but it was a church that didn't preach the Bible, didn't share the gospel. So I went through high school as a professing Christian, but not knowing the Lord, and my life was no different than anyone else. Came time for my 10th high school class reunion. I went to a very small town high school in Kansas. There were 39 in my graduating class. My wife had over 400 in her high school graduating class, 39 in my class. And I didn't want to have to do CPR all night long at my 10th high school class reunion. Hey, Tim, great to see you. What are you up to these days? Well, I'm a pastor. Boom, they just faint, keel over, start doing chest compressions, trying to revive them. So only 38 of us were still alive after 10 years. One of my classmates, LaVon Young, had been killed in a car accident, but I wrote my other 37 classmates a 3-page letter. Just said, I hope to see you at the 10th reunion coming up in May. I'm planning on being there. And I just kind of want to give you an update on my life, what's happened over these past 10 years. As any of you know, when I was in high school, I thought I was a Christian. I went to church every Sunday. I was a part of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, but I wasn't really a follower of Christ. I had head knowledge only. But I've come to know Christ personally, and I just wrote out my testimony in that letter. And I said, I hope to see you at the reunion, and I would love to be able to talk to you about what it means to have a relationship with Christ. So sent all that letter out. I show up that night, walk in the door. Mark Yennick sees me, comes walking over, gets right up in my face. He goes, I want the name of that church you're pastoring. I said, well, Mark, it's in Illinois. It's a long ways away. Why do you want to come? And he goes, no. He said, I want to call them and tell them what a phony you are. Tim Bucher, a pastor, what kind of game you playing there? What kind of charade you running? What kind of scam you trying to pull off? And I tried to explain to Mark about grace and how my life had genuinely been changed. He wanted nothing to do with it. But two of my classmates that night, Teresa and Danny, sought me out. They both had gotten married right out of high school. They both had had their spouse leave them for someone else. 10 years of heartache and brokenness and pain. And they each came to me during the evening and said, got your letter. I said, I'm glad. And they said, you said that you would be willing to talk tonight. You still have time? No time like the present. And I had the privilege of introducing two of my high school classmates to Christ. They're still walking with Lord. I saw Danny just when I was back home this summer. Just unbelievable what God's done in his life over these 4+ decades. Teresa, very active in the pro-life movement out in Colorado. And I think back to that, just an opportunity that I had to reconnect with friends. So think about friends, not just who are your immediate close circle of friends right now, but high school friends, college friends. Is there a way to reconnect and use that as an opportunity to share the gospel? Next, think about your neighborhood. Now, your neighborhood may look nothing like this. I grew up on a farm. Our closest neighbors were a mile in any different direction. But one of the great opportunities we have for ministry is within our neighborhoods. In fact, do you know that according to Acts 17, God determines the place of habitation of people? What that means is you aren't in your neighborhood by accident, and your neighbors aren't your neighbors by accident. So get to know your neighbors. Now, it used to be, according to Emily Post, Etiquette, and others, when someone new moved into a neighborhood, what did all the neighbors do? Right? They'd welcome them, they'd greet them, they'd bring them food, offer to help in any way that they could. How many of you, when you moved into your home, even here in Owensboro, Kentucky, had that happen? A few of you, right? We're still somewhat in the South, but I guarantee you most people today move into neighborhoods and a neighbor doesn't simply even lift a finger. Sharon and I's first home we bought in 1990 in a suburb of Chicago. I was teaching at Wheaton College at the time. Bought this home. It was a starter home in a brand new subdivision. Back then, mortgage rates were 12%. And we could not afford a used home. We were looking at dog houses. How can we pack our family of 5 into a dog house? But Illinois had a new program for first-time home buyers, 5.9% interest, but it had to be on new construction. So we bought an 1,178 square foot new starter home. We couldn't afford a used house. We could afford a new one because the interest rate was half. We were the last people to move into this subdivision of 87 homes. How many of our 86 neighbors came and welcomed us? 0. Moving truck was there. I'm carrying boxes in. Neighbors would drive by the street like this, not even making eye contact. So Sharon and I went on offense. We baked 86 dozen chocolate chip cookies. I say we baked. I turned on the oven to 350 degrees. And Sharon baked 86 dozen chocolate chip cookies, the kind with the big chunks. And we took a plate of a dozen chocolate chip cookies to all of our new neighbors, welcoming them into the neighborhood. We were the newcomers, right? They should have been bringing us cookies. They weren't going to, so we flipped the script. So we would walk over and ring the doorbell. A person would answer the door. I would go, hi, I'm Tim Bucher. This is my wife, Sharon. We had 3 kids at the time. These are our 3 kids. And we just bought the last house here in the subdivision, 831 Howell. Oh, yeah, we wondered who bought that house. Well, obviously not very much because you didn't come by to see. But what's you all's name? Well, we're Bill and Jill Thompson. So good to meet you. And I would walk away and I would just pull an index card out of my pocket and I would just write down Bill and Jill Thompson, 901 Division Avenue. And that became our prayer ministry, praying for our neighbors, getting to know our neighbors. In the 6 years that we lived there, we had the privilege of seeing 8 of our neighbors come to faith in Christ. But it all started with cookies. Now you may say, well, Tim, that's all well and good, but I've lived in my neighborhood for 3 years, and I didn't take cookies when I first moved in. What do I do now? Well, the Bible has an answer to that. You repent, okay? You go home, you turn on the oven to 350 degrees, you go to the store, you buy chocolate chip cookie mix, the kind with the big chunks, you put them in the oven, you bake them, and you walk over to your neighbors and you say, you know, life is so crazy busy. We've lived in this neighborhood for 2 years, and man, it's just, we're coming and going all different times, and we just realized, you know, we just haven't been the best of neighbors, and we want to do better. So I'm Tim Bucher. This is my wife, Sharon. We live down the street here, and we just wanted to officially introduce ourselves. The best time to do that would have been 2 years ago. The next best time is tomorrow. So who is my neighbor? And I'm going to give you a website here in a moment that's going to help you identify who your neighbors are. I'll circle back to that in a moment. Next, business associates or work associates. Again, you may not work in an office like this, but for those of you that work in the secular workplace, you are surrounded by unbelievers for at least 8 hours a day. It gives you an incredible opportunity to be a light in the midst of darkness. I think of the woman who came to her pastor and said, Pastor, I need you to pray for me. I am the only Christian in my office. And she said, I know the other workers talk about me behind my back. I know because when I walk into a room, the conversation stops. I want you to pray that God would give me another job. Pastor just asked her a question, said, where do you put lights? Well, she ignored the question and just continued. It's just gotten so bad. I know they're making fun of me. I know I am the only Christian in my office. I need a different job. Pastor asked her a second time, where do they put lights? Well, this time she responded, well, where it's dark. And then she realized, oh my gosh, and the pastor said, you know, God has placed you in a very dark place as a ray of light. And that woman went back to work the next day with a totally different perspective. Instead of seeing herself as a victim of circumstances, God had given her a ministry field. Now, I realize that some of you work for companies and corporations that have now put together guidelines. No religious displays at work. I mean, you could put anything on your desk but a Bible. You can put up any symbols but not a cross. You can talk about anything under the sun but not religion. And again, there are companies that have those kind of restrictions. So you say, well, my hands are tied. What can I do? Well, here's what you can do. You can build relationships through your work and then invite someone to a meal. I spent one summer just studying how Jesus ministered to people. And something that I saw that really excited me, Jesus did a lot of his ministry around meals. Well, that really excited me. It's like, Lord, thank you for the call into ministry. I can do this, right? I enjoy eating. I enjoy food. One of my mentors told me years ago, he said, Tim, if you will buy a man's lunch, you can witness to him any day of the week. So don't witness on company time. Don't violate company policy, but build relationships and then meet somebody for coffee. Meet them for dinner. Here's how these conversations have gone for me over the years. Sit down with someone and ask them, what's your goal in life? They'll share with me. Typically, it's some kind of materialism. And then we'll, Tim, what's your goal in life? What are you and Sharon living for? Well, we're followers of Christ. And everything in our life is centered around him. And then we sort of watch their reaction. It's like, 5 minutes ago you seemed so normal. And yet that opens the door to opportunities. I'll just give one illustration of this. This wasn't actually a business associate, but someone that I met through my son's AAU basketball team. My son started playing AAU basketball. I went to his first game, and it was one of those games where the officials were really having a rough night. You all been in the gym for one of those? It wasn't just one team that was mad at them. Everybody in the gym was mad at them. It's like they're missing every call. I mean, just the law of averages would say you ought to get half of them right. No, they're missing them all. Everybody in the gym is upset and mad. Now, because I want to be an encourager, I was trying to encourage the officials while maintaining my Christian witness, trying just to encourage them that there was a great game going on in this gym, and maybe they ought to watch it. Maybe they ought to pay attention. But I'm trying to be respectful. But I mean, everybody in there is frustrated. The man in the row behind me is likewise encouraging the officials, but with a much more extensive vocabulary. So I immediately conclude either this man doesn't know the Lord or he's a Christian in a serious backslidden state. Well, after the game, I go down to meet my son. My son says, "Dad, let me introduce you to my new best friend, his fellow basketball player, Chase." Turned out Chase's dad was the man behind me, Ray. So I immediately now have an opportunity. I said, "Ray, we're going to be spending a lot of time together this summer. I'd love to just get to know you better. Would there be any day next week," this was a Friday night, "that I could treat you to lunch?" He goes, "I'm free Wednesday." So let's meet at Mark's Feed Store for lunch at noon on Wednesday. So we did. So I just asked Ray, I said, tell me about yourself. What do I need to know to understand who you are? Well, he was a computer technician, still is. Loves computers, all this, married, had 3 kids, and no mention at all about church or religion. A huge Green Bay Packers fan. So he then says, "Tim, tell me about yourself." And again, I just said, "Well, Ray, the most important thing to know about me is that I'm a follower of Christ." His jaw just dropped. 5 minutes ago, you seemed so normal. So we just talked about it, and Ray just said, I'm really not into religion. I said, I can appreciate that. I'm not either. Kind of looked at me, but you said you're a pastor. Yeah, but I'm not into religion. No, I'm all about a relationship with Christ, not religion. Religion is man trying to climb the ladder to God. Christianity is God reaching down in the person of Christ to pull us up. Anyway, had a good time, waited 1 hour after lunch, and then I called Ray. So you just spent an hour with him. Why would you call him an hour later? Because I just wanted to reaffirm our friendship. So I called him and I said, "Ray, thanks for meeting me for lunch today. I really enjoyed getting to know you." He said, I felt the same way. He said, "I've just been sitting here thinking about how nice that lunch was." And Ray said, "Why don't we do that again next week?" I said, let's do. I let him initiate that. He said, "I'll buy next week." I let him. For the next 4 months, we had lunch almost every Wednesday at Mark's Feed Store. Have a Bible from that time that I call my barbecue Bible. It's got sauce dripped in different passages. As basically, I turned that Wednesday afternoon into a Bible study and just opened up the Bible to Ray and showed him who God was, our sin problem, what Christ has done for us, and our response. Had the privilege some weeks later of baptizing Ray and his 3 children. His wife was already a believer. Now, all of that came by simply an invitation to lunch and just starting the conversation. So think about your workplace. You may be a light in a very dark place. God's placed you there for a reason. What are the names of some of your coworkers that you would just reach out to and say, could I just meet you for coffee? Could I treat you to lunch? Would you like to come to my house for dinner? So business associates. Next is acquaintances. We're going to spend a little more time on this. I think this is one of the great untapped areas of our life. You say, well, what is the difference between an acquaintance and person X? Well, person X is someone you haven't yet met. That's why they're person X. You don't know who they are. An acquaintance is someone you met. They're not a close friend. They may not be a coworker, but they're someone that you've at least met, have some type of relationship with. So just looking down the list there, they're down parent-teacher groups. When Sharon and I lived in Chicago, our kids were in public school. I come from a long line of educators. Both my grandmothers were teachers, both of my parents. My dad eventually, when my grandfather died, left teaching into full-time farming. All three of my sisters are teachers. So teaching's kind of in our blood, and education's important to us. So Sharon and I joined the local PTO, the parent-teacher organization. And within a few months, they had named us the head of the PTO. Now, did I have time in my schedule to create and lead PTO meetings? No. But it enabled me to know what was going on in my kids' school, and it gave me opportunities to connect with unbelievers. Do you know that non-Christians care about their kids too? They care about their kids' education. And we had many wonderful gospel conversations with parents that we met through PTO. Looking on down, repair and maintenance people. I've had the opportunity to witness to a lot of repair people because my philosophy in cars is buy an old car and drive it into the ground. So these are people that I see sometimes far too often, but opportunities to share the gospel. They're retail salespeople. Let me share a little bit about my wife. My wife is a very gifted witness in her own right. And some years ago, when we had first moved to Louisville, as we were looking at houses, I really only had one criteria for the house, and that is that it have a rear entry garage with a flat pad big enough for a basketball court and a three-point line. I told Sharon, if you want to look at the kitchen, that's fine, but that's my criteria. Well, we just found the ideal house. On a cul-de-sac, rear entry garage, flat pad in back. I stepped it off, measured it off, big enough for three-point goal. So we bought that house. Sharon didn't like the kitchen, but we bought it anyway. We remodeled the kitchen. Every kid in the neighborhood wanted to come to our house after school. That's why I wanted to go there. We bought one of these Gorilla basketball goals, right? $800 back in 1996. My wife wasn't really sure about that budget expense. She said, sweetheart, Kmart has this Huffy Goal on sale for $79. Why 800 versus 80? I said that Huffy Goal would not last 8 minutes in our neighborhood. A kid would hang on the rim, it would break. These Gorilla goals are designed for gorillas. It will last. So put up that goal, put up lights so kids could play, and guess where every kid in the neighborhood came after school? To our house. It was great. Because that way we knew where our kids were, but it also gave us an opportunity to minister to neighborhood kids. But here was the problem. I got a phone call one day from the manager of our local Kroger. Congratulations, you are one of our top 25 customers. I told my wife I never want to get that phone call again. I said, well, why were you one of their top 25 customers? Well, we had 4 kids of our own, but almost every night we're feeding half the neighborhood. My wife would say it's time for dinner. She'd come out and she'd say, we're getting ready to stop and eat. Would you all like to have dinner with us? And I said, no, they would not. Their mother wants them home. Oh no, our mom says we can eat over here anytime we want. So I'm feeding the whole neighborhood. We get top 25 of customers at Kroger. I told Sharon, never again. Okay? But because my wife was buying groceries for the whole neighborhood, she's at Kroger 3 or 4 times a week. And that became a mission field for her. She would walk in, and here's John, the stock boy, putting soup cans on the shelf. She'd say, John, how's night school going? He's in night school. And, oh, it's hard. I'm working during the day, night school. Yeah, John, you keep working. You need to get that degree. You don't want to spend the rest of your life putting soup cans on the shelf at Kroger. Great job for now, but get your degree. Yes, Mrs. Bucher, I will. She goes back to the meat counter. See Chuck the butcher. She's not even buying any meat, but Chuck's mom's been in the hospital. Chuck, how's your mom doing? Still in the hospital. They're still running tests. Well, Chuck, we're praying for her, praying for you. She knew every employee in that store by name. She'd say, I'm just going to run to the store. I'll be back in 30 minutes. That was a lie. I mean, I knew it would be 2 hours and 30 minutes because she was ministering to people there. Now, that was not my mission field, right? My goal in Kroger is gone in 60 seconds. Now that they have the U-Scan, I can typically do it. I need to go in for a gallon of milk. I walk in the front door. I set my timer. Men are competitive. And I walk in. I've got my Kroger Plus card in one hand, my credit card in the other. They put milk at the front of the store now. Saves a lot of time. Walk in, grab the gallon of milk, scan the Kroger Plus card, scan the milk, scan my credit card. My record's 48 seconds, but I can typically get in, gone in 60. But one time, John the stock boy cost me at least 5 seconds. I come in the store, he's pushing his cart right in front. I had to detour around him. It's like, that wasn't my mission field. One time I'm checking out, there was some problem, so gave him my name. And Tim Bucher, are you Sharon Bucher's husband? I'm thinking, I have a name, I have an identity, I actually pay the bills here. I technically pay your salary, but I just said, yes, I am. And she starts jumping up and down and she yells at the cashier around it, Mildred, this is Sharon Bucher's husband. And she starts jumping up and down. My wife was like the unofficial chaplain at that Kroger for several years. Just an everyday course of life. She's going to be at the store anyway, so why not try and share the love of Christ? Never forget when it was a Thursday night because my wife was teaching at the seminary and Seminary Wives. Manager of Kroger calls. Is Sharon there? No, she's actually teaching tonight. Can I help you? Well, this is a manager of Kroger, and one of our employees' mother died, and they just wanted to make sure that Sharon knew. And I'm thinking, well, I happen to be an ordained minister. I've taught pastoral ministry at Southern Seminary. I know how to do grief counseling, but they weren't calling for me, right? That wasn't my mission field. They were calling for my wife. So again, where could you reach out? Next on the list is babysitters. Some of you have young kids, you hire babysitters. My wife was led to Christ by a family she babysat for in Charlotte, North Carolina. Family down the street, Lee and Lydia Smoke. Every Thanksgiving, I send a card to them. It's a thank you card. And I say, Lee and Lydia, thank you that when Sharon babysat your two boys, you didn't just look at her as the girl down the street who was a good babysitter. You saw her as someone who, even though she attended church, didn't know the Lord. And you shared the gospel with her and cultivated that in her life. UPS deliverers. When we lived in Chicago, we planted a church, and the church office was in our basement. So we had UPS deliveries typically 4 days out of 5, if not 5 out of 5. George was our driver. George was always in a hurry. We lived just off of the main street, and George would take that corner on 2 wheels and then come screeching to a stop. He was always in a hurry. He'd come running up across our lawn with a package and ring the doorbell and leave it. And so we saw George every day. So we started preparing refreshments for him. In the summer, Sharon had a glass of iced tea. He was from Chicago, so it was unsweet. In the winter, she'd have a piping hot cup of hot chocolate ready for him, maybe some cookies fresh out of the oven. And he would always grab them, thank you, and run back to his truck. He was always behind schedule. But one day I heard the tires screech, and I go up to get the package, and George isn't running across our lawn. He's walking with his head down, carrying a package. I said, George, are you okay? He said, no. My wife's left me. I don't know what to do. I said, George, I know you are on a timetable. I know you have a schedule, but would you have just 5 minutes where you could come in, where we could just talk and pray for you? He said, I'd really like that. So he came in. We were able to minister to George, establish a further, deeper relationship. So this is just what we mean by acquaintances. Someone that you may see regularly, but you don't really think about this is a person who needs the Lord. Just give a couple other ideas here, and then you can fill in some of the blanks yourself here. When I was a student at Southwestern Seminary back in the early 80s, I had come from being on a secular college campus, Kansas State University. My last 2 years there, I was an RA in the dormitory. I had 70 guys on my dorm floor, only one of whom was a professing Christian. So I had the opportunity, literally some days before breakfast, to share the gospel with people. I go from that environment where I am literally surrounded by unbelievers. I moved to Fort Worth. I'm living in seminary housing. I'm taking a full class load. I'm working for a Christian organization. So literally, all of my waking hours, I am surrounded by believers. And my spiritual life began to shrivel up, because while I was having great input, I'm now having no output. I'm still seeking to witness to person X, but I didn't really know any unbelievers in Fort Worth, Texas. So I began to pray, and I believe the Lord led me to join a bowling league. I thought you might be able to find unbelievers at a bowling alley, and was that ever true? The place was filled with them. This was before there was such a thing as a smoke-free bowling alley. I would bowl in a league from 7 to 8, and then I became the unofficial chaplain of that bowling alley. I was typically there till midnight, having conversations with people. My nickname was Preach. They didn't call me Pastor Tim or Pastor. It was just Preach. Somebody'd yell from 4 lanes over, "Hey, Preach, over here. We got a question for you." And I would come over, and there'd somebody have a Bible question, cigarette in one hand, beer in the other. Let's talk about the Bible. And that became my ministry. There were times at midnight, the manager would yell, "Hey, Preach, take it out to the parking lot. We got to clean up. We got to close down." If I die from lung cancer, it will never be because I've smoked, but for 2 years I inhaled enough secondhand smoke that I probably should be dead by now. But that was an opportunity for me. I enjoy bowling. Wouldn't be my first sport, but something you can do year-round. But that allowed me to connect with unbelievers. I'll give you one of the more recent ones. When Sharon and I became empty nesters, when our last daughter's tail lights were leaving our driveway, the red glow fading in the distance, I am jumping up and down. I'm jumping for joy. We are empty nesters. My wife's huddled over in the corner crying. And okay, I get it. You know, she's been a mom all this time, and she'll get over it. Well, a week later, she's still huddled in a corner crying. I'm like, I miss her too, but this is what we've prepared for. We're ready now for our life as empty nesters. She goes, "Tim, you don't understand. For the past 25 plus years, every morning I wake up and I think about my children. Where do they need to be during the day? What do they need to do? What do I need to fix them for lunch?" Well, you can still fix my lunch. Well, it wasn't the same thing. So I thought, well, I'll give her another week. And she's just not breaking out of this. She's just down and depressed because all her babies are now gone. So I made a mistake. I said, pick an item off your bucket list and let's do it. I think she was setting me up. She immediately said ballroom dancing. And I said, anything but that. She said, you said anything. So we end up going to ballroom dancing classes in September there in Louisville, Kentucky. Pro tip, she wore flip-flops to the first dancing lesson. Big mistake. 4 different times as we were going through the routines, I stepped on her toe, pinned the sandal to the floor. The next couple coming tripped over it. We were given explicit instructions, wear closed-toed shoes next time. So we now are in this dance class with the instructor and his wife, 5 other couples. So now they're acquaintances. We've learned all their names. We're in this dance class together. So this became a new mission field. So Sharon and I invited the instructor, Ken, his wife, Toya, out to dinner. Said, could we treat you to dinner before class next week? Sure. So we're there eating. Sharon's talking to Toya. I'm talking to Ken. And I said, Ken, I know you help Toya with her studio, but you have another job. What else you do? He said, yeah, I sell roofing materials wholesale. So we talked about that. And then he says, Tim, what do you do? And he took a big bite of chicken sandwich. And I said, I'm a pastor. And he started choking. I thought I was going to have to do the Heimlich. I said, Ken, are you okay? He said, yeah. He said, you're a pastor? And I said, yes. And he said, what group? And I said, Baptist. And he said, and you can dance? I said, obviously not. You saw me last week. He said, but you're allowed to dance? Well, obviously, yes, I'm in the class. So the rest of that time, Ken and Joy's jaws are just dropped like, oh my gosh, a Baptist pastor and his wife. So we have a delightful dinner, get to know them, come to the dance class. And Ken's getting ready to start the music. He goes, oh, wait a minute. Before we start, you all need to know that Tim here is a Baptist pastor, and that means Sharon is a Baptist pastor's wife. And these other 5 couples that were there, it was like the Red Sea parting. Two of them just kind of backing up, like, we don't even want to be in the same floor as you. The other 3, they're jaw-dropping, like, and in subsequent weeks, we had the privilege of taking those other 3 couples to dinner, sharing the hope that we have in Christ. So I don't know what all that looks like for you, but think about who are acquaintances. How can you leverage something you already like to do? I mentioned last week, I love to golf. Do you know that unbelievers like to golf too? I was playing some years ago, finished teaching for the day, beautiful day, had some time, so I just went over to Seneca Golf Course, 10 minutes from the seminary, just going to walk a quick 9 holes. I'd rather walk 9 holes on a golf course than walk on a treadmill. Got out there, wasn't busy, so I just teed off, and a young man came running up with his golf bag and says, the starter says I need to tee off and play with you. I said, great. So he hits his golf shot down the first fairway there. We're walking down. I introduced myself, and his name was Micah. And I said, Micah, what do you do? He said, well, I just graduated from high school. I'm working night shift at UPS now, trying to save money, not sure if I want to go to college yet or not. And then he said, Tim, what do you do? Again, I can answer that question in a variety of ways. I sometimes will say to people, I'm a relationship specialist. What? A relationship specialist? Well, what's that? Well, I help people better their relationship with God and with one another. That's a pretty accurate description of how I spend my time. I typically don't tell people I'm a seminary professor, not because I'm ashamed of that, but that typically stops conversation with people. So I just said, I'm a pastor. I wish I had a video. Mike is walking, carrying his golf bag. When I said I'm a pastor, he just slumped over like he'd been shot. And I know what's going on in his mind. He's thinking, God, I don't even know if you exist or not. And listen, I know I haven't lived a perfect life, but do I really deserve these next 2 hours of purgatory that you're going to put me through? Having to play golf with a pastor? I mean, I saw all of this in his reaction. And I prayed for God to allow me to play way beyond my ability. Billy Graham was once asked, does God always answer your prayers? And he said no, but he said, there's one place he never seems to answer them, and that's on the golf course. I just said, God, if there's ever a time, because Mike had told me he'd played golf in high school. So he's good, right? So very first hole there at Seneca, short par 4, but very hard. I've double bogeyed that hole more than I've parred it. I birdied it, and he parred it. So walking off the green, I go, junior golfer, huh? Said, you're already 1 down after 1 hole. And so some of you ladies are like, that's terrible. It's like, well, that's a man's love language, right? Trash talking. I mean, if I'm not trash talking you, I don't like you. So we're going back and forth, and comes down to the 9th hole. We're just playing 9 holes. He's got an 8-foot putt to tie me, and he misses. And he's just like, And I said, okay, I won. You have to come to my church this Sunday. He goes, what? I said, I won. I get to pick what you have to do. If you'd won, you got to pick what you had to do, but I won, so you have to come to my church on Sunday. He's like, I never agreed to that. And I'm like, our service starts at 10:45. Here's my card. The map is on the back. Show up at 10:30. Come to the parking lot at 10:30. I'll be down there to meet you, and I'll introduce you to a couple other guys. I'll be up front preaching, but they'll sit with you. And I didn't know if he'd come or not. And then I said, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to win the championship back. You're obviously a better golfer than I am. I shot a 34 2-under par. Never had that score in 9 holes in my life. God answered my prayers that one day. Never again, but that one day. So I said, Micah, I'm gonna let you pray. I'm gonna let you play me again, but not for 2 weeks. For the next 2 weeks, every morning when you get up and you look in the mirror, I want you to have to look at yourself and say, I lost to that pastor. You know, my wife is like, that's terrible. I know, that's love. So sure enough, Sunday, about 10:32, Micah's car comes limping into the parking lot. Came out, met him, introduced him to some others, and 4 months later, I stepped into the baptistry and held up a 7-iron. Said a 7-iron is a powerful weapon in the hands of God. Now, I share those stories not because I'm the greatest witness in the world. I'm not the best witness in my church, but I'm in the game. And I'm constantly asking the Lord, help me to lift my eyes up. Who are the people you place around me? So when I go and play golf, I pray, God, give me a divine appointment. When I go elsewhere, God, help me to see who is there. So who are the acquaintances? And then, of course, person X. Person X is the person we've not yet met, but God in his providence is going to bring us into relationship with them. So I mentioned I was going to give you a website for your neighbors. Here it is. As we make contact with unbelievers and begin to pray for them, there is a website here, blesseveryhome.com, all lowercase, put together by a couple of Christian businessmen who made a ton of money in the tech world, and they want Christians praying for their neighbors. So blesseveryhome.com, this is a free service. You go on there, you get an account, it's free. You put in your address and it will map out your neighborhood for you. It'll give you the names of all your neighbors, their street addresses. Now, it's only about 90% accurate. This is using data from all the different internet type things. You know, our information's out there everywhere. Census Bureau, different surveys and things. About 90% accurate, but I'll take 90% over not knowing anything. So that's a great starting point for you. If you want to bake those chocolate chip cookies, go meet your neighbors. Blesseveryhome.com will help you identify who your neighbors are. And then the whole concept of prayer triplets. This is something that the Billy Graham Association used for years. They discovered actually in one of the crusades that Billy had in London that the person who led that crusade called on Christians there in London to meet with 2 other Christians. That's why it's called a prayer triplet. There are 3 of you. And each of those 3 Christians were to list the names of 3 unbelievers, family members, friends, co-workers. And they would agree to meet once a week to pray for those 9 people to come to know Christ. They started this 6 months before the Billy Graham Crusade, 6 months before Billy Graham set foot in England. You want to know what happened? In many of those prayer triplets, all 9 of those unsaved people came to Christ before Billy Graham had preached one time. Why? First, because they were being prayed for, but second, that caused these Christians to lift up their eyes. They began thinking about these individuals and looking for opportunities, and God provided them. They were able to share the good news with them. So, praying. And then building relationships and seeking opportunities to serve. I want to just conclude by talking about different ways that a believer can relate to broken people in a fallen world. I like this 4 different ways that comes from Joe Aldridge's book, Lifestyle Evangelism. The way that some Christians react to living in a broken, fallen world is by rejection. Withdraw. Come out from among them and be ye separate. This was the monastic movement. We're going to get away from all of these sinful people. We're going to cloister ourselves behind these monastic walls. We're going to keep sin out there. Well, of course, the problem is when they walked through the door, sin walked in with them. But that can be a reaction to living in a broken, fallen world. And there's an element of truth in that, right? We should not engage in the deeds of darkness. And yet, if we totally separate ourselves from unbelievers, how can we be salt and light? So some realizing, well, that's an error, go to the opposite extreme, what Aldridge calls immersion. Now, you've probably never heard a Baptist pastor speak against immersion before. I'm about to. So it's a different kind of immersion. This type of immersion, Aldridge says, is when, well, I want to be around unbelievers. I want to identify with them. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. And so I'm just going to jump in with both feet. And the advantage is you're now connected with unbelievers, but the disadvantage is there's no salt and light. There's no distinctiveness whatsoever. It's the exact opposite of rejection. The third option that Aldridge gives, he says, is tragically what many Christians fall into. And it's what he calls the split adaptation model. It's kind of a blend of the rejection and immersion options. It's really kind of a form of spiritual schizophrenia. This is what some might call a Sunday-only Christian. On Sunday, person dresses all up in their Sunday best, goes to church, everything's fine, but during the rest of the week, they're indistinguishable as a Christian from everyone else around them. Think of the man who applied for a job. He had to list 3 references. He listed his pastor, his deacon, and his Sunday school teacher. And the interviewer said, this is great, but could I get the names of some people who know you the rest of the week? Okay. So the split adaptation model, the model that Aldridge argues for, and I think is correct, is what he calls critical participation. We are in the world, but we're not of the world. Jesus was a friend of sinners, but he never joined in their sin. But he was known as a friend of sinners. So being in the world, but not of the world. And that actually creates a tremendous tension. If you want to just totally separate, that's easy. You want to totally immerse, that's easy. You want to do split adaptation, you just got to figure out what day of the week it is. But to live in a broken, fallen world and yet not be of that world is a challenge. And yet that's what the Lord calls us to. So let me conclude with a letter by a man by the name of Jeff West. It's entitled, Your Neighbor. And then we're going to go into some practical application I mentioned earlier, and then we're going to have time for some question and answer before we wrap up. So this is written by a man named Jeff West, and it's simply entitled, Your Neighbor. He writes, you know me. I'm the fellow that takes care of your house when you go on vacation. Sometimes we cook out together on Saturday nights and the kids play in the yard. Our wives are good friends. They drink coffee together, trade recipes, and carpool the children. We talk together often about football and politics and inflation. We share a lot of the same ambitions and goals. Sometimes we share the same frustrations and disappointments. We are a lot alike, you and me. We want the best for our families. We determine to stand against adversity, to try to persevere. But sometimes you seem to have more strength than I have. On Sunday mornings, I'm in the yard watering the grass, and you drive by with your family. All of you dressed up in your Sunday best, and you wave at me. And I wave back knowing where you are going, but not understanding why. Your life is different than mine. Our wives have talked about it, but you and I are scared to mention it. There's a lot about you that I don't know. There's an emptiness in my life, a void I just can't seem to fill no matter how hard I try. I desperately want to be answered, to be comforted, to know. And I need someone to tell me. But we go on, and I don't mention it because some unknown fear prevents me. And you don't mention it because some unknown power seems to bind you. We laugh together, we joke, we share, but not about the really important things. Maybe someday, maybe never. I'm your neighbor, and I don't know Jesus. So take the next few minutes, hopefully as we went through that list of concentric circles, God brought to mind several different names. I just want you to glance back through that list and identify 3 people, just 3 names. God, these are 3 individuals that I'm going to begin to pray for. And I pray that over the next month, you would give me the opportunity to speak a word of hope to them. So take a moment, get those names, and then just share with the person next to you, group of 2s. We'll just take a few minutes to do this, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Names of 3 people. Okay, if you haven't yet started sharing names, begin. Person 1, share with your neighbor, and then in a minute, we're going to reverse. Names of 3 people that you want to commit to pray for over this next month. Okay, switch. If you haven't yet shared back, share your 3 names now with the person next to you. Okay, hopefully you were able to identify 3 names, and I just want to encourage you that that is a prayer that God delights to answer when we say, God, here are 3 names of individuals, family members, friends, co-workers, classmates, neighbors that I don't think know you and I have a burden for. God, would you be privileged to open a door of opportunity for me to share a word of hope? I've seen over the years when people have prayed that prayer, when I've prayed that prayer, God just does incredible things, just opens incredible doors. So pray for that, and let's see what God does over the next month. All right, it's almost 7:15. We're going to now open it up for question and answer. So Q&A about anything related to the topic of tonight, which was the concentric circles. If not, anything about evangelism in general, I'll be happy to try and address it. Any questions tonight? Yes, here.
Thank you so much for everything. Do you think you have the spiritual gift of evangelism, whereby, I mean, we're all supposed to evangelize, but it sounds second nature to you, but you've been doing it a long time.
Yeah. You know, that is a great question. I'm going to answer that more fully next week, where we're going to talk about that. But my short answer is no. And here's why. I am an introvert by nature. It is not natural for me to do this. It is difficult. Okay, that's not who I am. It's not how I'm wired up. When I came to Christ, God just put such a burden in my heart for other people to know Christ like I knew him. So I started taking tiny baby steps. And every time I took one, God met me there. But quite honestly, I mean, if you'd have told me in high school I would be a preacher, pastor, seminary professor, I wouldn't have believed you. It was nowhere on my radar. So, no, I don't believe I have the gift of evangelism. I think I have the gift of teaching. But I have a passion for evangelism. I have a passion to have people come to Christ. And I think that passion can help drive us no matter what our gift is. My wife has the spiritual gift of mercy. For those of you that are young and single out here, you're thinking about getting married, choose somebody with the gift of mercy. It is so wonderful. Because as a stupid husband, I need a lot of mercy, and my wife gives it abundantly. So my wife does not have the gift of evangelism. I believe her gift is mercy, but she is so evangelistic. She's always with hurting people, and she's not only putting salve on their wounds, she's going to what their greatest need is, which is the gospel. So both of us share the gospel regularly. I don't think either of us have the gift, but we have a passion, and we've made a commitment, and it's the commitment we started with tonight. Let me just challenge you again to lift up our eyes. When I was in seminary, I worked for an organization called International Evangelism Association. And part of the commitment to be on staff, we had to have at least 30 minutes in Bible reading each day and in prayer. We had to memorize 2 verses of scripture a week. I'd been doing all that in college already. I was up to that. But something new for me, we had to pray every day for the opportunity to witness. I thought, well, that's really a good prayer. A couple months into that, I realized, well, that's a good prayer. That was not the best prayer for me. And here's why. I get to the end of start my day, Lord, give me an opportunity to witness today. I get to the end of my day and I look back, I go, Lord, I'm sorry, I'm an idiot. You dropped 3 opportunities in my lap today. And because I was so focused on my schedule, my to-do list, my agenda, I missed them all. So I changed my prayer and how I begin every day, how I began this morning. Lord, today, help me to be sensitive to the opportunities you give me. That's a wonderful prayer, and a prayer God delights to answer. So, do I feel like I have the gift of evangelism? No. Am I committed to evangelism? Absolutely yes. And do I approach each day as a fresh opportunity? God, help me to be sensitive to opportunities? Yes. So, I have a lot of opportunities to share because I'm looking for them. So, great question. We're going to actually talk more about that next week, about the gift of evangelism and what that might or might not look like. Great question. Others? Back here? He's coming with the mic.
I like to think it's not so much our lack, but it's God's grace. You know what? There's so many things through Old Testament, all the things he's done. So Lord, help me. If I need to be broken, break me. But you know what? If I don't have a heart of love like Jesus to save those, then I am lost. So I just need to pray that he gives me the courage. And you know what? It don't need to be courage, but I just need to have the love to go out and do what he wants me to do.
Yep.
And the more I do that, the more he's going to bless me. Even if he don't give me that gifts, you know what? It's so important to do this. He will give me what I need.
Yeah. Amen. I'm challenged every time I read Matthew chapter 9, where it says, when Jesus saw the sinful multitudes, he felt compassion for them. That's not always my natural reaction. When I look upon the sinful multitudes, it's easy for me to feel condemnation or criticism or coldness or callousness. So absolutely, every day, Lord, help me to have compassion for people around you. I was reminded of this a few years ago. I'm still, even though I teach, I'm still in the elementary school in terms of the Christian life. God continually has to teach me lessons I should have learned long ago. Sharon and I, she found this advertisement for family portraits, and the price was just unbelievably good. Well, you know the adage, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. But it was a guy that was just set up in a strip mall there in Louisville. She said, we haven't had our picture done in forever. Let's go. So I agreed. We go to this strip mall, and it was just a fiasco. We get there. The guy says, be right with you. He's finishing up with current customers. And Sharon said, I'm going to go over here to this quick shop to the restroom. So the other couple leaves. He goes, where's your girlfriend? I said, you mean my wife? Oh, is she your wife? Yeah, she's my wife. Well, where'd she go? Well, she went over here to the restroom. That's what she told you. She's leaving you for another man. This guy had never taken Dale Carnegie's course, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And he starts telling crude jokes. And I just finally, to put a stop to it, I just said, sir, I'm not interested in hearing any of that. I'm a Baptist pastor. Well, then he started telling pastor jokes. And I finally, so if you look at that picture, which hangs on our bedroom wall to this day, you see me smiling, but it was a forced smile. I was not smiling in my heart. I'm not going to give this guy a red cent. I mean, what a jerk. So we get our pictures done. We go out to dinner that night. We're sitting there at dinner, and I'm just ragging on this guy. Can you believe it? I mean, a jerk with a capital J. You believe this guy? I'm just going on and on. And my sweet wife reaches across the table, puts her hand on mine, and says, you know, I once heard a brilliant evangelism professor say we should not expect lost people to act like they're saved. We should expect them to act like they're lost. I said, I think I know that professor you're talking about, and he's not so brilliant tonight. He's a complete idiot. So I said, after dinner, we're going to go back there. We went back. He'd already left, and I thought, well, I tried. That night, I had a dream, and in that dream, this man was standing before the Lord in judgment. He said, I didn't know. No one ever told me. He said, I once took a picture of a Baptist pastor and his wife, but he didn't tell me. The next morning, I called the 800 number. I knew this man was leaving. He was headed to California. I called. I was prepared to buy a plane ticket to California to share the gospel with this man. I was under such conviction. She said, now, where'd you say you were again? I said, Louisville. He said, oh, actually, he's decided he wants to come back. He had such a good time there. So he's coming back there next week. I said, book me. I came walking in. He saw me. He goes, where's your girlfriend? I said, you mean my wife? He goes, oh, yeah, she was your wife. Well, where is she? Well, she's at home. Oh, that's what she told you. She's leaving you for another man. Thinking, Lord, you are not making this easy. Said, you know, when I was here last week, you remember I told you I was a Baptist pastor? He goes, oh, yeah. He said, I got another joke. I said, no, I want to hear that. I said, let me tell you why I came back tonight. There was something I should have shared with you last week that I didn't. He goes, yeah, what's that? I said, it's called the gospel. It's the good news of what God has done for us in Christ. And I came here tonight to share that with you. and he listened. He didn't put his faith in Christ, but he heard the gospel. But I was reminded once again, pray for compassion. Pray that my heart would be like Jesus' heart every day. I teach this, and yet sometimes I forget. So a daily reminder, Lord, help me to be sensitive to opportunities, and don't let me be shocked when unbelievers sin. Should expect that from them. Shouldn't be upset about that. I should have compassion instead of condemnation. So thank you. Good word. Okay, time for maybe one or two more right here.
So a couple weeks ago, I got to hang out with some of my closest friends. They're both part of the LGBTQ community.
Mhm.
And before I hung out with them, I prayed and asked God, give me the opportunity to witness to them and to give me those words. And surprising enough, one of my friends, they were like, we've been seeing your stuff on Facebook. There's a change in you. Tell us more about it.
Yeah.
And so, very grateful. Started, witnessing to them. And the main thing that kept coming to my mind and my heart was just love. Show them the love of Christ.
Yeah.
But do you have any tips to continue that conversation with them?
Yeah, I think in a situation like that, it's helpful for us to identify that, we are all sinners. We all struggle with sin. That's why we need a Savior. And that's why what I shared with you last week, the second to the last, I think, bridge to the gospel, the Three Circles Bridge, may I share with you a way I've learned to think about my problems that has really helped me. I struggle with sin as well. Here's how God has helped me with that. So conveying the love of Christ. It says in John chapter 1, when Jesus came, he was full of grace and truth. That is so beautiful. It's easy for us to go to one extreme or the other. Some people are just full of grace and, it doesn't matter, everything's fine, everybody's cool. Just all grace, no truth. And then there are other people that use truth like a club just to bludgeon people. Jesus was full of grace and truth. Grace in communicating, for example, the woman caught in adultery in John chapter 8. Neither do I condemn you, go and sin no more. There's grace and there's truth. So just asking the Lord to give you the wisdom to be able to do that. The other thing that I like to use in challenging situations is the verse Ephesians 4:15, where Paul talks about speaking the truth in love. When I sometimes have to have a hard conversation with someone, I'll say, I want to begin by sharing a Bible verse with you. It's Ephesians 4:15, which says we ought to speak the truth in love. I'm about to speak truth to you that you may think is not loving because it's going to challenge you in terms of where you are in your life, but I want you to know this comes out of a heart of love. If I didn't care about you, I wouldn't even have this conversation. I'd just ignore you. See, the opposite of love isn't really hate, it's neglect. It's just ignoring a person. So sometimes I will preface the conversation in saying, I want you to know that I'm going to speak truth, but it's coming out of a heart of love. Now, does that always guarantee the person will receive it? No. Our responsibility is not to change anyone's heart. We can't do that. Our responsibility is to be faithful to share and pray that God will change hearts. And the great news is God's been doing that for 2,000 years, and he's still doing it today. Changing the hearts of individuals that we would look at. I met with a student today on campus. Before he came to Christ, he was near death 6 different times. Had a baseball bat broken over his head in a fight, concussion, almost brain bleed. Got stabbed out on a country road in a drug deal, gone bad. He's 6'7", 240. A 125-pound woman was driving down the road. By God's grace, she picked him up, put him in the back seat of her car, and got him in the emergency room before he bled out. 6 different times. He said finally on the 6th time, he was in a car accident, broke his neck in 2 places. They said he'd be paralyzed for life, and God delivered him out of that. And he finally said, okay, God, I'm listening. God finally got his attention. And that's one of the things, that's a dramatic instance, but God uses the circumstances of our life to break up the hardness of heart. So as we share with someone, they may today not be interested, but maybe 3 months from now or 6 months from now, the Holy Spirit's tilled the soil in our heart, and then that seed will take root. Well, let me close this in prayer, and then we'll be done for the evening. Father, I thank you for my brothers and sisters here tonight. Thank you for their love for you and their love for their neighbor that brought them here tonight. Lord, even as we have identified the names of 3 individuals that we want to pray for, and we ask humbly that you would give us an opportunity in the next 30 days to speak a word of hope into their lives. Lord, help us to lift up our eyes each day and see that the fields are white unto harvest. Lord, give us a sensitivity to opportunities that you put in our lives. And Lord, help us to be faithful when those opportunities come, all for your glory. Amen. All right, this is week 2 of 3. We're going to do this again, Lord willing, next Wednesday night. Hope to see you then.
You guys join me in thanking Dr. Booker.